G'day there guys, do you like revenge? Because revenge is bad sometimes, but it can be good sometimes. It's your main man Markee and welcome back to another r/revenge post, story, compilation, whatever you want to call it. Sit back, relax, chuck up onto the barbie and get ready for some bloody good content. Let's go. Posted by user Prestigious Issue 330. Titled, Terror Neighbours Make Our Lives Hell, Returned the Favour by Getting Them Raided. So, as we found out that we'd be expecting not one but two kids, we knew we had to move to a real house with more space. At the time, we were still living in a one-bedroom studio, one up from the ground floor, with its only entrance being a metal fire escape, stairs. Not ideal for a pregnant woman, let alone to live with two small babies. So we found a privately leased house that was newly renovated and had all the room and a large garden that we were looking for. Signed the lease, and immediately collected the keys. As the owner drove off, the woman next door comes up to me, immediately demanding we not make noise before noon, as her boyfriend works nights and sleeps in, and a whole bunch of other do's and don'ts. So right off the bat, we knew trouble was coming. As the house was fully renovated and not much had to be done, we were like, don't poke the bear. We'll do the things that make noise after noon. We moved in after 2 weeks, and the whole street was warm and welcoming. My wife was almost due giving birth to my twin daughters, and some offered help with anything we needed. They were really kind people. They also told us about our neighbours. Nobody liked them. He was a big bully and got into arguments with everybody. Also were known as radio pirates, as in illegal broadcasting on a radio with old Dutch bangers. This music is just terror on your ears, and possibly used on terrorists on black sites, which went alongside them partying Thursday to Sunday till 5 in the morning. Loud music, constant yelling, always drunken, etc. Really something to look forward to when moving in, certainly with 2 babies on the way. The partying began immediately, full blast. Real classy for someone demanding to be quiet when douchebag needs his beauty sleep. Then one day my father-in-law came to put new grass in. He has his trailer parked at the back of our houses, which is public space. Not according to him though. No. That exact spot where the trailer, full with grass sods, quite heavy stuff, was parked, was his spot, and we had to move the trailer. Not gonna happen, as I was not planning to walk all the way around the house with the sods. He gets angry right away and demanded me to move it. I told him to go F himself. I was done with him already then and there. I'm also a ginger, so besides having no soul, I do have a temper, which is always in check until you provoke me repeatedly. Anyone who knows me will tell you that you really had to make an effort for that to happen. We went on working, and end of the day comes when my father-in-law wants to leave. Hooks up the trailer, and bam! There was douchebag telling him off, yelling it's his spot and he better not do this again or else. Mess with me all you want, I can handle it, but what you don't do is threaten my family. I ran outside and told him in no uncertain terms to back off or he will be the sorry one. Total bluff on my side. Yes, I have that temper, but I'm not impressively built and have no hidden fighting skills. I do fight dirty. He backs off, father-in-law leaves, and I go inside where I find my wife crying. She got scared of him maybe doing something to her father and or me, and this is something we don't need right now. Combined with hormones from being pregnant, and you can paint that picture. So I'm even more pissed, but had to promise not to act on anything. I won't, dear, not yet anyway. Time went on without any real incident, and then came the time my wife goes into labor. Didn't go smooth and ended up having to deliver with C-section, or whatever it's called, because daughter 2 was almost strangled by the umbilical cord. We had to stay 3 nights, excruciating nights due to a lot of things. Finally, we get to go home. Family had put a giant sign in front of our yard, welcoming the babies. The sign was already up for a few days prior to coming home, so our friendly neighbours definitely knew about it. But did they give a flying F? No, they did not. From the first night on, they started to party and broad blasted their terror music. They started at noon and continued until 5 or 6 in the morning. Classy. They also kept going for days, so it wasn't just Thursday to Sunday. It was all week long and the next. So we were broken, hardly slept. One of our daughters suffered from heavy cramps combined with all the noise, and her parents at the end of their wits, so she cried a lot. And then I just had it. I researched some things on radio pirates, the laws and regulations, and on his large 5-meter-plus antenna in his backyard, which was illegal in itself. But he used it to illegally broadcast on radio, which meant he had a lot of equipment to do so, which was even more illegal and can even get you jailed. But at the very least, they could seize it all and fine him big time, in the 10 to 45k area. Now, I did not immediately turn him in, but instead were looking for another house to lease first. This is because I figured it wouldn't sit well with him and my having a wife and 2 babies in the house alone during the day because I had to go to work. I hear you guys thinking, why not involve the police? Well, they are utterly useless in cases like this. We called once, and what they did disturbs me to this day. They rang at their doorbell and immediately started off by saying we called them about noise complaints. Yes, you read that right. No protection or whatsoever, just blatantly told them we were the reason that they were there. Told them to keep it down and that was it. They didn't even follow up with us or anything. As you can guess, douchebag was now even more pissed and told me the next day, or yelled over the fences that separate our backyards that I should really not do that again. A threat yet again of which I told the police. I didn't report it the first time as I chalked that up to alpha male and heat of the moment, but without witnesses to corroborate, nothing could be done yet again. Some days later, I walked out the front door and he just stepped out of his car. Came up to me demanding that I cut back some of our ivory that grew on our side of the fence because it tangled with his big-ass antenna. He would be gone for some hours, and I could come into his garden to cut back the ivy that grew through on their side. And then a light bulb went on above my head. I told him politely that I would do that immediately. Why? Because that gave me the opportunity to find out the make and model of this antenna to ascertain its signal strength, where the cables go exactly, and what kind of cables they were. Again, to know the signal strength that it handled. Also, it gave me a good view of the equipment he had through the window so I could snap some photographs of it. This was the icing on the cake, because in the meantime, we did manage to find a new home, and already had signed the lease so we would be gone in 2 weeks. Luckily, we only had to paint some walls for the girls' room and furthermore just pack up our things and move them to the other house. So after I trimmed the ivy and collected my evidence, I went online that night to find the proper channels to report a broadcast pirate and which entity was tasked to catching said pirate. It turned out that I had to call the telecom agency but also the police. Wasn't too happy with the latter, but I remembered I have a nephew that works for the police. Officially, his area was immigration, but knew enough colleagues that could help us, and we could trust not to confront them again saying that I was the one that sent them. That was extremely important for our safety when doing what I was doing. So I gave both the agency and the police all the evidence I collected, pointed them to the frequencies he pirated so they could listen in. Then they started a neighborhood investigation, which wasn't really necessary, but this was to cover our butts, to make it look like he got caught by accident, because they had an active investigation in our area. You never know what he can learn from legal documents and such. We also asked them to wait with the raid. Yes, they raid pirates' houses, preferably in the early hours of the day, because of his beauty sleep rendering him incapable of fleeing or hiding evidence, etc. We moved 2 weeks later, and they raided him 2 days after we moved. All of his equipment, computers, radios, cell phone, and his car was seized. He left in cuffs. His wife/girlfriend did too, for making a big scene and trying to interfere. All of which was live reported to me by one of my ex-neighbours who were equally ecstatic about this. It turned out, this wasn't the first time he got caught, but his 3rd time. His car had no insurance on it, and his MOT failed. This would normally have no big consequences because he didn't drive it while raided, but they had the guy surveilled on for a week, and that definitely meant that he was seen driving it while not having insurance and valid MOT. He was fined somewhere around 30,000 euros, went to jail for 12 weeks, and everything seized was destroyed except the car. His girlfriend had to do some 40 hours of community service. They had to sell the house, which made for very happy neighbours, as they too were over and done with them. Like I said, I do fight, but very dirty. You have to really make an effort for me to get to that point. They did, and suffered. Over a year later, when shopping for groceries, I encountered them. With the foulest of looks, if looks could kill, I would be a smouldering heap of ash, but nothing more than that. Now in the comments, Zesty Salt Shaker says, broke the cardinal rule. One illegal thing at a time. Good on you for taking him down. Also, if you're breaking the law, don't be an asshole and give others reasons to look into you. And now your old neighbours can enjoy some radio silence. It's amazing how many problems can be avoided by being kind and minding your own business. Far too often, people living in glass houses throw stones. I shovel the elderly neighbour lady's driveway without being asked. When I had teenage daughters partying in the backyard, I didn't hear a word from her. Super nice to have good neighbours. Oh, that final meeting at the grocery store must have been so full of schadenfreude. Fantastic story, and I'm glad they're both out of there for your health and sanity. Although now that they are gone too, it sounds like it might have been a good neighbourhood to live again. And OP replies, I won't lie, it felt real good. And it actually is now. I still see two of my old neighbours from time to time, and they say that it was heaven when they finally left. Curious. Never heard of pirate radio. What's it like? Like he broadcasts music, or he's operating a ham without a license? And OP replies, it's an illegal radio station. They jack a frequency somehow. Hence that big-ass antenna, and play the DJ that almost no one wants to hear. Almost all of them play Dutch tearjerkers and German schlagers, and between every few songs, they call out a telephone number so you can call to request your song, and even dedicate it to someone. I won't link you to examples because I wouldn't wish this terror on any of you. But I get it at some level. It's a niche in the music industry here that no radio station would play. They fill a gap for a few people. Funnily enough, it's often played at construction sites too. For a couple of years now, there's been one station that plays Dutch artists exclusively. I don't know if that diminished piracy a lot, but the increasing fines and potential jail time surely did. Also, your equipment, which isn't cheap, gets seized and destroyed. And our next post is by user StrawberryCold9267, titled, How My Ancestor Supposedly Took Down a Racist Businessman. So this is an old story that's been told in my family for as long as I can remember. We're talking my grandfather was told it by his grandfather and so on. Note that this story has close to 200 years to be embellished and twisted, so take everything with a grain of salt rather than screaming fake. Even if only a fourth of the story is true, it's still a great story. So this is the story of my ancestor we'll call John, because that's the name I've always been told. John was a black man in America during the time when slavery was dying out, his grandparents having been brought there from Africa along with their children. John eventually was freed through some means. I've heard both that he paid his way out, or the state he was in abolished slavery, and he was freed that way, and found himself fighting in the Civil War because he felt it was the right thing to do. During the war, he became good friends with a man known only as Mitch, who supposedly came from money, but had joined against his parents' wishes because he believed in freedom for all. Again, grain of salt. The two were in the same regiment and made it through alive, though some relatives say Mitch lost a leg or an arm in the war. Fast forward to the end of the war, and John and his new wife Mary he'd met during the war used the money he'd earned to set up a small shop on the East Coast. The most common city mentioned is Boston, in a small neighborhood. The shop became successful, John being a charming man and surprisingly savvy businessman. The neighborhood he'd set up, quickly growing as the city grew, meant there were always customers who needed whatever it was he sold. I've heard everything from groceries to workers' tools. They lived happily and had 3 children together during the time, spending a decade there when suddenly, presumably accompanied by the roar of thunder and screeches of crows, Mr. Business arrived in town. Mr. Business has apparently been on the wrong side of the war and fought quite hard to keep his slaves, but was also smart enough to sell out other racists when he saw how the tides of war were rolling, getting by with no losses except his free laborers. This had been the beginning of the end for his once successful plantation/farm, as all the workers he could find to replace his slaves had wanted things like pay for their services. He'd struggled to find loyal workers that didn't charge more than the absolute minimum, and after a series of bad harvests, had chosen to pack up, sell his land, and head east to find a new source of income. He arrived and began buying up local businesses that seemed profitable, and eventually found out about John's successful store. He was more than happy to discuss a fair price for the store, until he saw the skin color of the owner, that is. 10 years was not enough time to erase a lifetime of institutionalized racism. He began harassing John to sell his rinky-dink store and find a farm to work on. Don't quote me on that. Offering way below the actual value, and when laughed out of the store, began trying to sabotage John's business. Like getting thugs to throw rocks through windows, sabotaging deliveries, and making a scene in the store. John soldiered on though, having grown tragically used to fighting against racism. He also had a lot of friends in the community who helped keep the store floating. Then it was that John's oldest son, who was 13 to 14 at the time, found himself getting beaten up heading home at night from his job. Again, blurry details, and wound up with a lot of scars that he'd supposedly been stuck with all his life. John had had enough, and as luck would have it, had an out, having been contacted by his old friend Mitch. Mitch was starting up a farm/plantation in the west-south-southwest, and needed loyal workers. He'd offered John a foreman position, good pay, and a plot of land to live on with his family. This, dear readers, is when the revenge plan begins. John contacted Mr. Business, offering to sell at 75% what the shop was actually worth, and maybe because his other businesses hadn't worked out, he took it. However, John supplied the contract and proper solicitor to make things legal. The contract basically saying that after midnight of the date of signing, the shop and everything inside would transfer ownership to Mr. Business. Little did he know that day up until midnight, the shop was having a massive clearance sale, selling everything not nailed down at ridiculous prices to a grateful neighborhood. When they closed up that night and mailed the keys to Mr. Business, there was little left to sell in the store, if anything. John never found out what happened next, as they left town soon after and never returned. But personally, I'd like to think that Mr. Business arrived with his workers to an empty store with no deliveries coming, screaming and crying in the mud as he realized he'd been outsmarted by a lesser species. John and his family moved to work at Mitch's farm for the rest of their lives, and John supposedly passed away in his 60s. Thank you for reading. Again, a lot of this is probably embellished, if not straight up a fairy tale, but my family all treat it as a true story, and I felt that it was too good of a story not to share here. Now in the comments, Zorab1 says, "My guess is that the people in the neighborhood may have avoided the store if an alternative was available if the new owner managed to get it going. This is Boston, and back then, there weren't any big box stores, so you had plenty of small businesses available." And OP replies, "That's probably what happened. Best as I can gather, John's store was there when the neighborhood was less than 300 and remained the main store until there were 1,000 plus 10 years later. So he was one of the first, and someone everyone had talked to more than once. The neighborhood was also mixed, again, grain of salt, so I assume the African Americans of the neighborhood didn't fancy visiting a store owned by a racist prick." Alright guys, that's the end of the video. Friendly reminder that I'm now posting daily on my second channel, Markee 2. If you want to laugh at memes with me, link is down in the description below. On phone, you just click that little arrow underneath the video. I also want to say thank you to all my channel members and Patreon subscribers. Your names are currently floating down the screen here, and I love to see all of you guys. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for supporting me. I really appreciate it. If you see yourself on screen, I want you to give yourself a big pat on the back for being amazing as always, and thank you for supporting me again. I do hope that you guys have a good day, night, sleep, whatever it is you're up to. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.